Waiting for some of us to get ready.
Yeah, you're fine. I my mouse is I don't know why, but it's having trouble. Guys, sorry.
For some of us to get ready.
Well,
Yeah, you're
can
fine.
there we go. I hate how that auto plays. I wish this would let me just have that all set up like pre-gamed, but that's okay. Did either of you get to take a look at that uh I guess new YouTube thing. It's funny because in the first 15, 20 minutes, he's like, I'm not a Hegelian. And he compares it to Marx saying he's not a Marxist, which I thought was funny. And he keeps saying, no, Hegel's not my North Star. But then he turns around and say, yeah, okay, most of what Hegel says turns out to be right. Like it's like he's a schizophrenic when he's talking about Hegel. Like you can tell he really likes the phenomenology, but he also calls it the thing that Hegel abandoned. Because if you look in the later books, he almost never refers to it, the phenomenology that is. Um, but he also acknowledged what Hegel says about it being a ladder to the science. So he tries to have it both ways, and I don't know if he's just being uh um I don't know if he's being like
Performative or
like no, like
I mean,
if he's being intentionally obtuse, or if he's like cut tongue in cheek, like, oh, here's my trying to be dialectical, but not really. I'm like, is he for real?
almost it reminds me of what I was reading Metamodernism. Finally getting through like the first intro chapter and talking about we're going through all this sort of stuff. Now we're turning back to a second immediacy. It's kind of like, everything going through like wait, we're going through mediation and returning back to immediacy?
Oh,
No, read this.
you're not supposed to go backwards.
Well, no, we don't. Hegel doesn't. It's like a uplifted immediacy, which
Yeah,
literally, like, I'm reading it like you're rediscovering Hegel's concepts without Hegel.
yeah, yeah.
That's
That you know what? That happens not because people uh that 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 is a testimony to Hegel, to what Hegel highlighted in his work, because there are aspects in Hegel's work that have been there all along since the ancients, actually. and
yeah.
and well, that's another thing that this new guy, whatever, this prof on YouTube says. And that's that. Hang on just a second. Let me see if I can find his name real quick. His name is Antonio Wolf. And
Yeah.
I'll just say this for all our listeners. Antonio Wolf has a complete commentary on the phenomenology of spirits preface from beginning to end, and it's hours long. There's like seven
Hmm.
classes in here that goes all the way to the end, and I'm gonna sit down and listen to it. But if anyone's interested, you should go look up Antonio Wolf on YouTube and find out what he's all about. I have the feeling that he claims to approach the problem of the phenomenology's preface from the point of view of immanent logical thought, as opposed to historical or social whatever. Basically, he avoids the French, and the French is in the French commentary from the 20th century on Hegel, which basically tried to, I don't know, they tried to assimilate it into French philosophical thought, and that didn't go over very well. Who are the French guys, or who are the French guys who tried to do that? What were their names? They put out some commentaries in the mid 20th century. There was,
Pippin?
hmm,
Pippin or is he American? I can't remember.
not Pippin, earlier than Pippin.
Okay.
We're talking, hang on, French philosopher Hegel. So, French commentators on Hegel. So we're talking about Alexandra Koheve, Jean
Yeah.
Hippolyte, and Jean Val.
The first one I think is the biggest guy.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not read up on what they did, but the half hour Hegel tried to center his reading of the phenomenology on Koheve
Yeah, Koheve influenced a whole bunch of French
and
philosophers.
yeah, and Hippolyte. Whereas this guy is like, look, here's what Hegel wrote, and here's the plain meaning of what it means, and goes from there. I mean, I haven't watched anything but the first 20 minutes of Wolf's new commentary, I guess you could call it. So, stay tuned, or our listeners, you should go see for yourself. But yeah, so there it is. And I was thinking, you know what, this would be my perfect way of getting back into the phenomenology from taking my little break. So, uh, but going back to what we're doing, we're looking at section 3 of the philosophy of nature. We are at the third section, organics, which parallels in the logic what is known as the, what's it called, Kyle?
Um, through what again? Sorry, I was following, but like
Yeah, section 3 organics parallels the logic's
concept, right?
concept. There you go. Thank you.
So there's
So,
also a parallel to yet again the you know being reflection and concept in here as well, because apparently through this even Hegel said that the vegetable there's a section like the vegetable is in reflection, even if it's
mhm.
not a reflection of life.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those things where even calling vegetable essential, which is kind of how you might do it, is only it's only a step in the process, because if you look at the balance of three that he has throughout each book, there's three, meets three, meets three, meets three. You calling it a parallel gets to kind of what we're looking at, but not really. Like you can't you like if I sat here and tried to say organics is really the concept for the philosophy of nature, on a certain level you can say that. On another level, organics makes up far more than that, because organics makes up the what this new guy Wolf, I think his name is, keep forgetting his name, Antonio Wolf, says about sublation. Sublation, according to Wolf, is better translated as upheaval. He basically says there's no good English word that takes destruction, preservation, and uplift, all three of those things, into account. And so people have done with approximations. And so he goes away from the German translation of Aufhebung into sublation, and he calls it upheaval, which takes into account destruction, preservation, and uplift, all three at the same time. Which is an interesting argument. I don't know that I have fully taken it on board, but the fact that it the fact that it gives you all three stages rather than just the two is kind of hopeful looking. Um, but yeah, organics parallels the concept in the other, but just leaving it at that sort of flattens out the fact that the entirety of abstract thought that's packed into the sorry, my brain is stuttering. Um, you get into nature, and um nature is the Kyle, help me out here. The entirety of the logic, all the way up to absolute. Uh,
Knowing.
hmm?
To absolute knowing.
Yeah, absolute knowing is packaged into how we can conceptualize nature. Like before absolute knowing, if you try to conceptualize nature before you get to absolute knowing, you're going to fall short in any number of ways. And so organics is not only the organics is not only the culmination between the being and the essence of nature, which is what is it again, Kyle? What came before organics? What's section 1 and 2?
Mechanics and physics.
Yeah, so mechanics and physics, uh, uplifted into a stable third is organics. But it's not just those two; it's also the entirety of absolute knowing, packaged up among that as well. And so, yeah, all of that sounds messy, but Hegel has actually made it quite orderly in his system. So, I know we read the first part before, but if Kyle, if you want to read 337 again this time, we can start from there.
Yep. Worth it this time since we're finally entering it.
Yeah.
The real totality of body as the infinite process in which individuality determines itself to particularity or finitude, and equally negates this and returns into itself, reestablishing itself at the end of the process as its beginning, is thus an elevation into the first ideality of nature, but an ideality which is fulfilled and as a self-related negative unity has essentially developed the nature of self and become subjective. This accomplished, the idea has entered into existence, at first an immediate existence, life. This is firstly as shape, the universal image of life, the geological organism, secondly as particular formal subjectivity, the vegetable organism, thirdly as individual concrete subjectivity, the animal organism. The idea has truth and actually only so far as is determined as subjective. Life, as only the immediate idea is therefore external to itself, is non-life, only the corpse of the life process. The organism as totality of inanimmately existing mechanical and physical nature. Distinguished from this stage is the beginning of subjective vitality, the living organism in the vegetable kingdom. The individual, but as external to itself, still falling apart into its members, which are themselves individuals. It is first in the animal organism that the differences of shape are so developed as to exist essentially only as its members, thereby constituting its subject. Vitality as natural falls apart into the indeterminate polarity of living things, which, however, are in themselves subjective organisms, is only in the idea that they are one life, one organic system of life.
Okay, so for those following along, there are a couple levels going on here. The first level is that going into organics, we've come to the subjective portion of the philosophy of nature, subjective in general. What he talks about here, he says an ideality which is fulfilled and is self-related negative unity has essentially developed the nature of self and become subjective. But then he divides up the stages of this subjectivity into three things. The third of which is at it is itself fully fulfilled subjectivity in the animal organism. And so when he talks about this, they're not the same thing. One is at one level of the dialectic uh, of, I mean, is it of essentially what result in organics. And then there's the level within organics itself. Again, there are three levels within organics itself. There's the immediate, there's the essential, and then there's the fulfilled, the fully subjective, uh, the animal organism constituting its subject. So if that's um, kind of confusing, that sort of helps a little, I think, to explain that you're not falling back to the subjective at the beginning of it. you're building up to a subjective that it's at the end of the process. Um, could we call that double subjective? I don't think that's a meaningful term, but I'm like trying to connect the two. You know what I mean?
Double
Because
subjective, I get that point, is sort of a redefinition of subjective that's more concrete.
yeah, yeah. So the subjective we start with at the beginning is more the immediate subjective, and then at the end it's the fulfilled concrete subjective. Now, you go back to the other two stages, like we were talking about earlier with physics and mechanics and physics. The third step in those processes are also the subjective in those processes. Um, yeah, it um for our audience, you're going to have to read up a little bit on what again, my brain is stuttering. What it is that a Kyle, help me out here. What's the three-part argument called? Syllogism. Yes. Yeah. Hegel's system is syllogism built on syllogism based on it's syllogisms all the way down. There's no part of this that isn't a process of syllogistic where you take two things and it becomes a third, and it's not like other systems where it's like thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. A syllogism is more like you take the two sides of an extreme and you have a middle term in which those two extremes are combined and preserved, their individuality destroyed, but their collective being together is preserved and uplifted into that third thing. It's like organics. Organics is mechanics and physics um, preserved as a collective together and uplifted into something that's a third thing that not only combines them but actually makes them active processes in a bigger process. And if you think about how biology works, that explanation makes perfect sense. If you look at organic science today, what's involved in that is both mechanical and physics explanations of how things work combined into a third thing that is self um, self-preserving, self-replicating. In other words, life, right? Life is the reproduction of those processes independent of those earlier talked about processes. And so there you can see a biological uh, example of what a dialectical, can you call it a dialectical syllogism looks like? I don't know. Maybe I'm mixing terms there. Um, but yeah. What do you think, Kyle, Jim?
Mhm.
Jim, I know you're reading. You don't have to say anything. It's cool.
I think we're just kind of starting out, so it's hard to say anything on this right now. But
Yeah. Same here.
Suzette does kind of go back over where we came
Yeah,
from this perspective, which is, I'd say, a little more interesting than I thought than it would seem at first.
yeah,
There's an implied, critique of the way people had been viewing the progress of the natural sciences since the 17th century, which going back to Descartes, you had an emphasis on mechanistic explanations of things, especially including physiology.
yes,
And now Hegel is not rejecting. I don't think Hegel rejects that, but he's saying it's not enough either.
yeah.
There's something very he doesn't. I mean, he makes no mention of Aristotle, any of this, as far as I can see, but there is something very Aristotelian about his way of thinking about things.
I agree
I think he's sort
because
of trying to put Aristotle on a more modern basis.
you see especially in the essential section, the one we just left on physics, where he groups things by earth, air, fire, and water, that very much reflects an Aristotelian
Yeah,
mindset, but you can see him banish that way of thinking to the ideal
yeah,
only. and showing you how, yes, in the ideal sphere, it very much still makes sense to sort of categorize our things that way, but you've got to do it to an eye with an eye to the materialist perspective, where you have a reality out there you're trying to match your ideal headspace to. And I think that's the leap
Yeah.
that the philosophy of nature tries to make, is to try to take Aristotelian older categories into the modern world, dealing with a materialism which Hegel talks about in the Logic had gone rampant with the perversion of logical thought in school, and how they tried to take logical thought and make it the basis for looking at the entire world, um, sort of in a dogmatic way. You know, saying that it applied everywhere in the exact same way, cookie cutter, sort of the way Stalinism deals with the real world with its version of Marxism. But that's a whole nother. I've just lost all the MLs on our channel. They're gone. Sorry, guys. Uh, um, uh, No, but no, but seriously, stay tuned in, because if you want to know, if you want to understand more of what Marx and Engels, uh, and Lenin, and of course Trotsky, were talking about in their own approaches to socialism, the key to understanding what dialectic thought is here. This is ground zero. Don't miss Hegel, or you're missing out. Okay, I'm going to shut up about that. Um, how long is this Zuzats? Is it terribly long? Are we gonna walk through it, or should we? Let's take a look. So he says let's look back. Oh yeah,
It's
all right.
looking and looking forward. So I
Yeah, he's looking back and then looking forward. Okay, in the first section we saw matter, the abstract asunderness as space. Next we had particular masses determined over against one another, and lastly, gravity, which constitutes the fundamental determination which all particularity was sublated and ideal. This ideality of gravity, which in the second section was transformed into light and into shape, is now restored. The matter there individualized contains the free determinants nations as we saw them in the elements and their processes, the realm of appearance, and in individual shape, it develops into totality. Um, blah, 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 blah. Um, and then there's the third section. Uh, yeah, this Zusatz is basically a review of the philosophy of nature. Is that right? That's right.
yeah,
Starting from space, talking about what matter is, what gravity is, the realm of appearance, individual shapes, and then the third section, the living body, is always on the point of passing over into the chemical process. Oxygen, hydrogen, salt are always about to appear, but are always again sublated. And only at death or in disease is the chemical process able to prevail. Thus, it is in life that what is the true first exists. It is superior to the stars and the sun, which last is indeed an individual, but not a subject. As unity of the notion, an outwardly turned existence in which the notion preserves itself. Life is idea, and in this sense, Spinoza too termed life the adequate notion, an expression which is, of course, still quite abstract. Life is the union of opposites, generally not merely of the opposition of notion and reality. Wherever inner and outer cause and effect, ends and means, subjectivity and objectivity are one and the same, there is life. You notice this, that he's saying that life is basically the proof against Kant's opposing determinations, like inner and outer. Kant would look at as mutually opposed. Hegel is positing here that life is the proof positive that Kant was wrong, and how he made his determinations. Basically, Kant. What do I want to say? You could almost say Kant stopped at the essential level and went no further. Would that be accurate to say? Because if you look in like the science of logic, you look in the doctrine of essence and you see these opposed things, but in the doctrine of essence, he brings them together. So maybe he never made it past the doctrine of being in terms of things passing into each other. Maybe not even that close. I don't know. I'd have to read more to like figure it out. Um, that's sorry. That's no great matter here. Um, let's see here. The true determination of life is that reality and the unity of notion and reality no longer exists in immediate matter, no longer exists independently as a plurality of properties existing outside one another, but that the notion is absolute ideality of their indifferent subsistence. Since the ideality we encountered in the chemical process is here positive, individuality is thus posited in its freedom. The subjective infinite form is now also in its objectivity. This is not yet so in shape, because in this, the determinations of the infinite form still have a fixed determinate being as matters. The abstract notion of the, okay, sorry, I'm just kind of blindly. Solar system, giant members, independent shapes. But the living creature possesses these giant members of nature in one body, in which everything particular is posited as appearance. Thus, in life, light completely masters gravity. The living creature, therefore, is individuality, which has subdued within itself the further particularization of gravity and is active within itself. So basically, the Zusatz, which I'm pretty sure are students' notes from Hegel's lecture, he's sort of bringing together how life encompasses all of these uplifted properties that we've already visited in the earlier parts of the philosophy of nature. Yeah. And he goes through all of it from space all the way through to the chemical process, is what he's trying to get at. Um, Yeah, and then he says, since life as idea is the movement of itself, whereby it first constitutes itself as subject, it converts itself into its other, into its own obverse. It gives itself the form of. All right, hang on just a second. I'll be right back.
No problem. Its own. Isn't already itself what is actually is movement of its becoming, of what which is result is also from which it has resulted. Yeah, turned into its own obverse, which is like the other side of the coin metaphor here, I assume. But, hmm. Life which results itself as the other of itself is firstly geological nature. As such, it is only the ground, literally, the basis of life. True, not to be life. It is not veritable subjectivity and does not bring its different members into unity. Moments of on one side stands individuality, the other the process of it. Individuality does not yet exist as active, idealizing life. Yeah, so that's syllogism right there. There's no middle term other than just the activity, but it has to go between the two extremes rather than being two sides of the same coin. Immediate life, therefore, life which is estranged from itself because it's partly as outside of itself. Process objectivity is divorced from the universal subject itself. Okay. Now we're getting to subject. Yeah, the subjectivity is separate from the process. Okay.
Hey, sorry. Just had to talk to the wife.
Mm,
You're fine. Just planning for tomorrow. Okay, so like you said, Kyle, this is the summary section
yeah.
where he, you know, it it's actually kind of awesome because if you haven't read the first two sections, I could see this just being very confusing how they summarize it, but it all seems to track pretty well. Um, yeah. And then, and then he goes down. The second part is the stage of reflection, which is physics, and he goes down through all of physics. Um, the water kingdom. Wait, what was before the water?
he's doing it a little differently here. I think that was like mineral.
Yeah, mineral. Yeah, mineral, water, and then fire,
Which
which gets into the chemical process.
realize because remember at the end of like chemistry that mineral comes back around to mineral, but it's different. So that's isn't that what Earth was, right? Earth was the end result of the mineral. So
Yeah.
that so that means human would be the end result of the mineral kingdom coming back to itself.
Ah. Yeah. Yeah, at the end here he says animal life is therefore the notion which displays itself in space and time. Each member has within itself the entire soul, is not self-subsistent, but exists only as bound up with the whole. Feeling the finding of self in self is the highest achievement and occurs here for the first time. It is to remain one with itself in determinateness to be freely at home with oneself. The plant does not find itself within itself because its members are subsistent individuals over against it. The explicated notion of life is animal nature. Here, for the first time, we have vitality in its true form. These three forms constitute life. And then he goes into geological nature, which, oh, okay, yeah. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. Geological nature starts at 338. The first organism, just because it is at first determined as immediate organism or as only implicitly organism, does not exist as a living creature. For as subject and process, life is essentially a self-mediating activity. Weren't we talking about this earlier? Yeah, we were. There's Hegel doing it again. Considered from the standpoint of subjective life, the first moment of particularization is that the organism makes itself into its own presupposition, in this way giving itself the form of immediacy in which it sets itself over against its condition and outer subsistence. The inwardization, Erinnerung, okay, of the idea of nature within itself to subjective vitality and still more to spiritual vitality is the judgment or partition of the idea into itself and into this processless immediacy. This immediate totality presupposed by the subjective totality is only the shape of the organism, the earth body as the universal system of individual bodies.
You just said judgment. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Yeah, and judgment um is very much a vocabulary item in Hegel that's it's it's not exactly the same way of saying judgment that we're used to saying judgment. You know, like you go back to the phenomenology and to the science of logic, and he talks about judgment as a I don't even remember. Like I wish I could just define it for you, rattle it off straight out of I think it's the logic, but I'm not sure that there's a section on judgment, I think. Is that right, Kyle? And what judgment
Yeah,
consists of.
it's like it's prelude to the syllogism because syllogism is like a triad of judgments.
That's right. So when you're making judgment, when you're dealing with the shape of thought and the different processes that lead to the syllogism, which is basically the height or one of the major highs of thought. Before that, the judgment is a way of bringing an argument out, but it's sort of an incomplete argument. You make a judgment, and it's very in the vernacular. It's subjective from a particular perspective, but not all perspective. As many perspectives as say the syllogism as a judgment would be able to afford us. And so yeah, you hit the nail on the head, Kyle.
Mhm.
I need to go and reread because uh as readers in our audience have probably already figured out, definition within Hegel's system is a very slippery object. You can't just it's not like a dictionary or an encyclopedia, although it is, where you can go look up a term and it defines it for you. Bam, right? Earlier philosophical systems um, operated on the notion that um, concepts had a hard and set definition. Hegel shows that concepts are knit together relatively to each other in such a way that, um, well, in a logical order, such that if you wanted the truth of judgment at the level of, say, life in the philosophy of nature, you could make that definition linking what judgment is as defined in the logic with the subject in either nature or nature, life, or human social practices, right? So it's never just an isolated definition. It's a definition linked to a definition from the perspective of this set of things, right? That's why the syllogism is well the the three syllogisms are the level of complexity you need to get, I guess, the latitude and longitude of the specificity of whatever you're looking for, right? It's never as simple as one definition. It's more like three definitions cross-matched, I guess you could say. I'm trying to make a geographical um, metaphor here, and it's in my head. It's not coming out of my mouth very well. But if you think of how longitude and latitude locate a thing on the Earth better than, say, you know, an old map which had just one course and you had to follow that course exactly to find these places, you get some of what I'm talking about. Call Hegel a coordinate system for thought. You know, I like that. A coordinate, an accurate coordinate system for thought. Um, but it's very hard to train people in this coordinate system with Hegel's language. There's there's got to be a better way, but
Hmm.
not to change what Hegel did, but translate it into something that is more intuitive. Like Kyle, you mentioned the book by the Green Book with the diagrams.
Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, that one. What's the name of it again?
It's
Mar-
picturing Hegel, and I'm saying that because I can see it on my bookshelf right now.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Picturing Hegel by Julie E. Maybe. Um, tried to take the encyclopedia logic, not the science of logic, but the encyclopedia logic, and diagram the diagram. I'm not sure. Not not each concept one at a time, but maybe the concepts and their transitions between them. Does it get to that level of complexity, Kyle? I haven't read it.
I haven't read it too far either yet.
Okay.
But
But I mean, she talks be like at the very beginning when she's talking being, nothing, and becoming. Does she put it all in one diagram, all three together, or does she take them one at a time?
one at a time.
Okay.
It's the become or being, and then nothing, and then the becoming, and then this stability to permanent being.
Sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Uh okay, the Zusatz is very short, I'll just say it. In the chemical process, the earth is already present as this totality. Um the universal elements enter into the particular corporealities of the totality and are partly causes, partly effects of the process. So he's talking about Earth and what it's populated with, but this movement is only abstract because the corporealities are only particular. Now, the Earth, it is true, is totality, but because it is only implicitly the process of these bodies, the process falls outside of its product, which is perpetually renewed. As regards um, so when he's talking about the process falling outside of its product, he's basically talking about um, how we think of the earth in our brains and our idea sphere, right, is different from what reality actually turns out to be, okay? And so when we look at the earth as a totality, a global outlook on the earth, right? You're really talking about a very abstract process within a process within a process within your head that's denoting what the earth is. But it can't get more particular than that at this stage. Now, the earth, it is true, is totality, but because it is only implicitly the process of these bodies, the process falls outside of its product, which is perpetually renewed. As regards the content, none of the determinations belonging to life may be lacking, but as they exist outside of one another, the infinite form of subjectivity is lacking. So basically, when you're thinking about the Earth at this level, the geological level, right? You know, all of life on Earth may be there, but as far as concerns our determination of what the Earth is made up of and the differences within it, we're still at the immediate level where it's looked at more as a single globe, right? Like, as opposed to all the things that are on it. Like, we can't conceive yet of all the things that are on the Earth as separate processes within it, except as sort of an abstraction. We know that there are people on the Earth. We know that there are geological formations, there are buildings, there are rivers, there are all of this stuff, but it's all rather abstract because we haven't particularized those at this level of abstraction in the philosophy of nature, if that makes any sense. The
Well,
Earth,
as I said in the messaging, this is where Hegel, you see Hegel as sort of an ecological thinker.
yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it? I I am I'm kind of impressed with how with how he describes it.
And again, I takes you like Marx's idea of the metabolic rift, which John Bellamy Foster's been sort of made a whole career out of too. And in fact, Foster, I think, has been working on reconstructing the dialectics of nature in terms of that.
I haven't read very much of his stuff, basically because I have serious problems with the school of Marxism that he comes from.
Yeah.
Um, but his focus on ecological issues, I think is a good start. I couldn't judge it because I haven't read it probably as well as you have, Jim. I just need to sit down and do it. Okay, so Hegel ends here. He says the earth, thus presupposed by life as its own basis, is posited as not posited, for the positing is concealed by the immediacy. In other words, the positing of life that's on earth is concealed by the immediacy of the earth. Again, it's a globe. There's stuff on it, but we can't conceive of what's on it yet at this level of abstraction. It does exist. Hegel knows life on earth does exist, but we can't. We haven't we haven't put on our telescope or binoculars and sharpened the image yet. All we can see is the rocky earth, which is why this is at the geological level. The next stage then is that this presupposition resolves itself. And so he goes into the history of the earth, and that's really short. So Kyle, why don't you cover that 339? And then we'll wrap up
Yep.
because we're at 9:05. I realize I was late. Sorry.
No worries. The members of this mere implicit organism do not therefore contain a life process within themselves and constitute an external system whose forms exhibit the unfolding of an underlying idea, but whose process of formation lies in the past. The powers behind this process, which nature leaves behind as self-subsistences beyond the earth, are the connection of the Earth with the solar system and its position therein, its solar, lunar, and cometary life, the inclination of its axis to the orbit and the magnetic axis. Standing in closer relationship to these axes in their polarization is the distribution of sea and land, the compact spreading of the land in the north, the division and sharp tapering of the parts toward the south, and the separation into an old and a new world, and the further division of the former into continents distinguished from one another and from the new world by their physical, organic, and anthropological character, to all of which is joined a continent even younger and more immature than the new world, mountain ranges, etc.
Yeah. So you can see here how Hegel is breaking out um, more particularities that make up the, I guess you could say, the external system of the earth that underlies the life on earth. Yeah, unfolding of an underlying idea and whose process of formation lies in the past. There's something very, very modern about this description, wouldn't you say? In terms of a setting of what the Earth uh, unfolded for life to exist on the Earth, all of these formations in the past had to happen in the distribution, and not only the distribution of the land, but the distribution of the air on the Earth. In other words, the he says the solar, lunar, and the cometary life. Cometary uh, is his way of talking about the atmosphere and how it formed and how it sustains life. And so when I think about how all of these are distributed in his description, it's a very modern conception that not only deals with the ideal, which goes to the earth, air, sea, or earth, air, water, and fire, but also the materialist description of what the earth actually looks like in its division, so on and so forth. Almost going into the sociological, because he mentions the old and the new world, which to me denotes a historical. There are the ancient Greeks, and then there's the modern European setting which he lives in, right? So even our conceptions derive not just from the geological but also the sociological. He, I'm not sure. He sort of sneaks it in there. Do you think? Because if you think about the sociological, the old and the new world, right? Um, like does he mean that as sociological, or does he mean it like Pangea versus where the continents are today?
I don't even know if they had the conception for that yet.
Okay.
So I think this is sort of the discovering the two different halves of the planet and trying to, the similarities and difference between the two.
Yeah, and human thought in the ancient sense versus the modern sense is very much implicated here with old and new world, because where else would those concepts come from other than um, our changing conceptions of what the earth looks like and was made up as, you know? So this is one of those paragraphs that I read it and then I read it again and I notice that and I think to myself, anyone who tried to pigeonhole Hegel as a Eurocentric only thinker is very much mistaken, considering he has a sense of history that expands the centric from the ancient smaller world to the global. And if there's one thing that I got out of the first two sections, and especially out of this, it's that Hegel is more of a global thinker in terms of the whole earth, not only geographically, but historically. Um, so yeah, if anyone ever comes up to you and says, yeah, Hegel's too Eurocentric, show them this paragraph and say, how could a Eurocentric thinker think this globally and this ecologically? It's
He was
wow.
only Eurocentric in the limitations of what he could know than his attempts to
Yeah,
actually be non.
yeah. And no, I agree with that. Um,
Puts
uh,
him a few miles ahead of Kant. Because Kant had, I guess, a series of lectures on geography. There's a lot of, very ethnocentric and racist thinking in Kant. I don't think you find as much in Hegel.
Anything else you think got Matt or?
No, I think that's a good stopping point. Being able to summarize what Hegel was doing in the first two sections of the book and where we're headed in the third section, how we've gone from very abstract notions of space, time, matter, the what's in that space and time. We've come down now to solid things, to where we can look at the history of the Earth as a totality that includes the chemical processes that exist in that space and how they appear to us in their immediacy under the geological categorization, and how that's a setting for life that's basically vegetable and animal, right? So that's where we are, and I think it's I I think at this point, I think the rest of the book is going to be easier to talk about because it's less trying to get our heads around abstractive parts of what life is to life that includes those parts that we're more used to talking about. That makes sense. Cool?
Mhm.
Clear as mud? All right, comrades. Great talking to you. Next time we'll get into the Zuzats sections on the history of the Earth, which I think are
Gets kind of long, but it is a
yeah, it's kind of long, but it ends on page. I wish they'd give us numbers. Damn it, like 285, and then it gets into the structure of the Earth, and I wonder how long that is. Um, I'm not going to set like a hard number, but let's go from where we are to page 293, which is life of the Earth. So 293 is the end, and so hang on, sorry. Um, uh, so 278 to 293, read, and we'll just start talking about and summarize what we can. But I think that's a pretty good set, maybe 15, 16 pages.
all right. Sounds good.
All right, comrades, have a great night. Great to see you again.